Hey everybody, welcome in. Tonight we're talking about limited hangouts. So let's just go ahead and get into it. There's a strange comfort in half-truths. They sound familiar, they feel safe, and they let us believe we understand the world even when we don't. Every day we're handed versions of reality that have been trimmed or softened or rearranged. A press release that feels honest, but it's not complete. A headline that tells part of the story, a conversation where someone admits just enough to seem transparent. We call it honesty, but it's really just choreography. And once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. This episode isn't about lies, it's about the subtler art of strategic truth. The kind that shapes what we believe, how we speak, and even who we think we are. We call this limited hangouts or modified limited hangouts. Limited hangouts are sneaky by design. Even the term itself was whispered inside three-letter agencies long before the public ever heard it. By the time Nixon's team accidentally let it slip in the Watergate tapes, the phrase had already lived a quiet life behind closed doors. The phrase limited hangout didn't appear out of nowhere in 1973. It was part of the internal vocabulary of intelligence work, a shorthand for a tactic that had existed for decades. Reveal just enough truth to control the story, but never enough to lose the control of the narrative. During the Cold War, information itself became a weapon. Agencies learned that total secrecy bred suspicion, but partial truth could disarm. So they practiced selective transparency, releasing fragments of facts to steer public perception. No one called it a limited hangout yet, but the behavior was identical. The thing is you don't invent secret code words for things that you aren't doing. The phrase existed because the practice existed. From that moment forward, the public had language for something they'd always sensed but couldn't name. The art of telling the truth strategically. They're not full lies, they're strategic fragments of truth. A limited hangout happens when an individual, an organization, or government releases just enough information to appear transparent while keeping the most damaging facts buried. It's a psychological sleight of hand. Honesty used as camouflage. A modified limited hangout goes further. It alters or reframes the disclosed information so that even the truth becomes strategically misleading. It's not just omission, it's distortion through selective truth. Once you understand the anatomy of a limited hangout, you start to see them everywhere, not as conspiracies, but as survival strategies. Some modern examples. When a casino admits a breach but calls it a contained incident, then quietly settles with the hacker, that's not transparency, that's choreography. It's a modified limited hangout, truth edited for optics. The company admits the event but reframes it as control. The public hears accountability, the institution maintains narrative power. More human example, when you get pulled over and say, I was speeding because I have diarrhea. You're offering a partial truth that reframes the situation to minimize consequences. You're not denying the act of speeding, you're managing perception. That's the same instinct scaled down in a personal level of what limited hangouts and modified limited hangouts are. We all curate honesty when full truth feels too costly. In the movie A Few Good Men, when Colonel Jessup screams, "You can't handle the truth," he's not just defending himself, he's defending the idea that partial truth is necessary for order. That's the emotional core of every limited hangout, the belief that people can't handle the full story. Limited and modified hangouts have changed the way we experience truth. They've taught us to expect half answers, to read between the lines, to question sincerity even in ourselves. Over time, the tactic doesn't just distort what we hear, it rewires how we speak. We start editing our own honesty, trimming it for comfort, for optics, for survival. The hangout stops being a government tool and becomes a human reflex. It feels simple to say that we either want the whole truth or no truth, but the reality is more complicated. Most people want just enough truth to stay comfortable. Full truth often demands change, accountability, or emotional discomfort, so we unconsciously negotiate with it. Limited and modified hangouts thrive in that space between curiosity and comfort. We tell ourselves we want the truth, all of it, but do we? The whole truth is usually heavy. It disrupts systems, relationships, and self image. So we settle for versions of it. We accept the edited truth because it feels safer. Limited hangouts don't just protect institutions, they also protect us from the shock of seeing everything. I notice it myself sometimes. I'll say something that's technically true but not fully honest, a modified limited hangout, and then I'll have to stop and correct it because I want to be a person of integrity. And that means retraining my brain to reflect the kind of person I strive to be, not the kind of narrative I want others to believe about me. Limited and modified hangouts don't just change what we hear, they change what we believe. They train us to expect distortion, to doubt sincerity, to crave explanation but reject certainty. And somewhere in that loop, truth itself becomes suspect. We see it in the Charlie Kirk investigation. Most of us probably want more limited hangouts in that situation. We want someone to explain how it was done with a 30-06. We want someone to tell us why they paved over the crime scene. We want answers, but at this point, would we ever believe them? And that's the paradox. That's the thing. The more we're fed partial truths, the less we trust full ones. Limited hangouts don't just erode trust, they redefine it. We start to believe that truth is always conditional, always edited, always negotiable. Needless to say, we as humans, as Americans, have a complicated relationship with the truth. Part of it was done to us, and part of it we absorbed, adapted, and built into who we are. We learned to live inside partial truths, to survive them, to speak them, and now, even when we want the whole truth, we flinch because it's heavier than we remember. But maybe integrity starts with noticing that reflex and choosing to unlearn it. So, let's talk about some practical ways to stop being influenced by limited hangouts, because awareness without action just becomes cynicism. One of the strongest things that you can do, and I've said this before about other things, is just call it out when you see it. Notice the pattern. Partial truth addressed as transparency. When you hear someone say, "We've been fully transparent," ask yourself, transparent about what? Naming the tactic breaks its spell. Call them out yourself. Catch those moments when you soften honesty for comfort. Pause, correct yourself, restate it. Integrity isn't perfection, it's practice. Every time you revise your own half-truth, you retrain your brain towards clarity. Call those out in others, not to shame them, but to invite accountability. Ask better questions, push for context. When someone gives a polished answer, ask for the messier one that's underneath it. There almost always is. Call them out in our government. Demand full truth, not curated truth. Read beyond press releases. Compare statements to actions. That's a big one. The more we normalize calling out limited hangouts, the harder it becomes for institutions to rely on them. Trust isn't fragile, it's just uncomfortable. And the more we practice facing it, the less power partial truth has over us. It's not enough to recognize. We have to learn how to keep them from shaping how we think, these partial truths. It's not enough to recognize partial truths. We have to learn how to keep them from shaping how we think. Some ways that we can do that is we can slow down our reactions. Limited hangouts thrive on emotional immediacy. When you hear a partial truth, pause before reacting. Ask what's missing. Ask who benefits from this version of the story. That moment of reflection breaks the manipulation loop. And we talk about this all the time, but being centered, one of the key parts of being centered as a human being is not to react, but to respond. Diversify where you get your information. Don't rely on a single source, especially one that claims full transparency. Read across perspectives, including those that challenge your own thoughts. The more angles you see, the harder it becomes for selective truth to define your reality. Practicing radical honesty in small ways. In conversation, resist the urge to soften or edit truth for comfort. When you catch yourself doing it, correct it out loud. That retrains your mind to value clarity over optics, the same discipline I described earlier. And maybe most importantly is to reward the truth telling that happens in your circles. When someone admits something uncomfortable, don't punish it. Thank them for their honesty. That's how cultures shift, by making the truth safe again. And lastly, what you can do is you can stay curious and not cynical. Cynicism is the end game for hangouts. That's the end goal. Because then they can say you're crazy, you don't believe anything, you're a conspiracy theorist. Curiosity keeps you open without being naive. Ask questions but don't assume deception everywhere. Balance skepticism with empathy. The antidote to selective truth isn't distrust, it's discernment. Not everybody is lying about everything all the time. So we see these half-truths, these limited hangouts, these modified limited hangouts. We see them everywhere if we look hard enough, from politics to personal life. Leave a comment about how a modified hangout that you've used in your personal life or had used against you. Maybe it was half-truth at work, a softened confession, or a story told to protect someone else's feelings. Let's see how often that we edit honesty. Because truth isn't something we demand, it's something we practice. And maybe the first step towards full truth is admitting how often we participate in the very thing we criticize. How often we soften our honesty, how often we curate our own transparency. The concept of hangouts might have started in those three-letter agencies in our government, but the hangout doesn't end with them. It ends with us deciding to stop performing truth and start living it. Maybe that's the quiet revolution. Not shouting for transparency, but choosing it in our own lives, in our own relationships, in our own interactions. Choosing to tell the whole story, even when it's uncomfortable. Choosing to be the kind of person who doesn't just expose half-truths, but refuses to speak them. Because when we start living truth instead of performing it, we stop being part of the hangout and start becoming part of the healing. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on Limited Hangouts. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.